They refused to even talk to her, until one man in the hospital lobby stood up and said, "Wait. I'm not asking for myself, can I at least ask?" The girl's voice was quiet, but it carried clearly through the hospital lobby, cutting through the constant hum of footsteps, distant announcements, and rolling carts. She stood at the reception desk on her tiptoes, barely tall enough to see over the counter. Her blue dress hung neatly on her small frame, and a bright red backpack rested against her back, its straps worn and slightly frayed. She held on to one of them tightly, as if letting go might cause her to disappear altogether. The nurse behind the desk did not look at her at first. Her eyes remained fixed on the computer screen as she sighed, clearly exhausted and in no mood for interruptions. "You shouldn't be here," the nurse said flatly. "This is not a place for children. Where are your parents?" The girl swallowed. She had practiced this moment in her head all the way to the hospital, rehearsed every word so she wouldn't cry or sound scared. Still, her throat felt tight. "I just wanted to ask," she said again, more softly now. "It's about medicine. For my mom." The nurse finally glanced down, her expression impatient rather than curious. "We don't discuss medical information with children," she replied. "You need to leave." The girl nodded quickly, as if she had expected this answer all along. She took a small step back, her fingers tightening around the backpack strap until her knuckles turned pale. "I understand," she whispered. "I won't take long. I just wanted to know if there's something cheaper. Or maybe, something we could wait for." The nurse turned away, already reaching for paperwork. "I said no," she replied. "Go home." The girl stood frozen for a moment, her eyes fixed on the counter. Around her, adults passed by without slowing down, some brushing past her shoulder without noticing her at all. She felt very small then, smaller than she had felt walking into the building alone. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, more to herself than to anyone else. "I won't ask any more." She turned to leave, her steps slow and careful, as if she were afraid of making noise. That was when a man sitting several rows away looked up. Ethan Carter had been in the hospital for over an hour, waiting for a private meeting with doctors. He was used to hospitals, to their sterile smells and controlled chaos, but he was not used to hearing a child speak with that kind of restraint. He noticed her immediately, the red backpack, the way she held herself too straight, the way she avoided eye contact with everyone around her. As the girl passed by, he heard her murmur under her breath, almost inaudibly, "Mom said it might be like this." Ethan stood up before he fully realized he had decided to. His chair scraped softly against the floor as he stepped forward. "Excuse me," he said, his voice calm but firm. The nurse looked up, surprised now. "Yes?" she asked. Ethan's gaze shifted briefly to the girl, who had stopped walking and was staring at the floor, clearly bracing herself for more rejection. "She asked a question," he said. "And she deserves an answer." The girl slowly lifted her head, disbelief flickering across her face. She hadn't expected anyone to speak for her. Not here. Not anywhere. For the first time since she had entered the hospital, someone was actually looking at her, not past her. And Ethan Carter realized that whatever meeting he had been waiting for no longer mattered. The nurse straightened in her chair, clearly unsettled by the sudden shift in attention. She glanced from Ethan to the girl and back again, her professional mask slipping just enough to reveal irritation. "Sir, this is a hospital," she said. "We have procedures. We can't." "You can answer a child who is asking about medicine for her mother," Ethan replied evenly. His tone was calm, but there was no softness in it now. "Or you can explain why you refuse to." The nurse hesitated. People nearby had begun to slow down, pretending not to listen while doing exactly that. The girl stood a few steps away, unsure whether she was allowed to stay or if she should leave before she caused more trouble. Her shoulders were tense, her body angled toward the exit as if she were already preparing to run. Ethan turned toward her and lowered himself slightly so he wasn't towering over her. "You don't have to go," he said quietly. "Not yet." She looked up at him, her blue eyes wide and uncertain. "I didn't mean to make anyone angry," she said quickly. "I can leave. I really can." "What's your name?" Ethan asked. She hesitated, then answered, "Mia." "Mia," he repeated. "How old are you?" "6, she said, almost apologetically, as if that too might be a problem. Ethan nodded and stood again, turning back to the nurse. "She's 6, he said. "She came here alone to ask about medicine for her mother. If that doesn't earn at least a conversation, I'd like to know what does." The nurse exhaled sharply, clearly uncomfortable now that the situation had become public. "I can't give out medical advice," she said. "Especially not to a child." "No one asked for advice," Ethan replied. "She asked for information." He looked back at Mia. "What exactly were you trying to find out?" he asked. Mia swallowed and clutched her backpack strap again, grounding herself. "My mom has pills," she said carefully. "The doctor gave them to her before. But they ran out. At the pharmacy they said it costs too much now. I just wanted to know if there's another way. Or if there's a list. Or something we could wait for." Her words came slowly but steadily, as if she were placing them down one by one so they wouldn't break. The nurse's expression shifted, not into kindness, but into discomfort. "That's not how it works," she said. "You need insurance, documents, appointments." Mia nodded immediately. "I know," she said. "I just wanted to know where to go." Ethan felt something tighten in his chest at the way she accepted barriers without complaint, as if she had already learned that systems were not built with her in mind. "Who's with your mother right now?" he asked. "No one," Mia replied. "She's sleeping. She told me not to go, but I didn't want her to wake up and still feel sick." Ethan glanced around the lobby again. Adults everywhere. Resources everywhere. And yet a child had walked in alone because there was no one else. "All right," he said decisively. "We're not doing this at the counter." He gestured toward a nearby seating area. "Come sit with me," he said to Mia. "We'll figure this out together." Mia hesitated, looking once more at the nurse, as if asking permission that wasn't coming. "Go on," Ethan said gently. "You're not in trouble." She followed him slowly, every step cautious, as if the floor might change its mind beneath her feet. When she sat down, her legs still didn't reach the ground. She folded her hands in her lap again and waited, just as she had waited at the desk, prepared for the moment when she would be told this was all a mistake. Ethan sat beside her, close enough that she didn't feel alone, but not so close that she felt trapped. "Your mom's name?" he asked. "Anne," Mia answered. "And how long has she been sick?" Mia looked down at her shoes. "Long enough that she stopped pretending she wasn't," she said quietly. That answer told Ethan more than any medical chart ever could. He leaned back slightly and made a decision he would later realize changed far more than just one afternoon. "You did the right thing by coming here," he said. "Now let's make sure you don't have to do it alone again." Mia sat quietly beside Ethan, her back straight, her hands folded so neatly in her lap that it looked rehearsed. She kept her feet tucked back under the chair, as if trying to take up as little space as possible, and her gaze moved carefully between Ethan and the floor. Every few seconds, she glanced toward the reception desk, clearly expecting someone to come over and tell her she had stayed too long. Ethan noticed everything. He noticed the way she flinched when a voice nearby grew louder. He noticed how she stopped herself from swinging her legs, how she seemed to hold her breath whenever footsteps passed close to them. This was not a child who was simply shy. This was a child who had learned, very early, that being unnoticed was safer. "Do you feel okay sitting here?" Ethan asked gently. Mia nodded immediately. "Yes," she said. "I can sit anywhere." The answer bothered him more than if she had said no. "You don't have to prove anything," he said. "You're allowed to be comfortable." She looked at him, confused by the statement, then nodded again, even though it was clear she didn't fully understand what comfort was supposed to feel like. Ethan leaned forward slightly. "Tell me about your mom," he said. "Not the illness. Just her." Mia hesitated. This question hadn't been part of her plan. "She's nice," she said after a moment. "She used to sing when she cooked. Even when we didn't have much, she made it feel normal." Her voice softened as she spoke, and for the first time since Ethan had met her, her shoulders relaxed a little. "She says she's tired because she worked too much before," Mia continued. "She tells me stories when the lights are off, so I won't be scared of the dark." Ethan felt a slow, steady pressure build in his chest. "And now?" he asked quietly. Mia's eyes dropped again. "Now she sleeps more," she said. "Sometimes she forgets to eat. Sometimes she tells me she's fine even when she's shaking." She paused, then added in a smaller voice, "I don't like when she lies to me." Ethan nodded. "Neither do I," he said. They sat in silence for a moment, the noise of the hospital flowing around them. Mia picked at a loose thread on her dress, twisting it between her fingers. "She didn't want me to come here," Mia said suddenly. "She said people don't like being asked for things. Especially people who have a lot." "And what did you think?" Ethan asked. Mia shrugged. "I thought maybe that's true," she said. "But I also thought maybe if I didn't ask, it would be worse." "That's a very hard choice for someone your age," Ethan said. Mia looked up at him then. "I didn't want to be brave," she said honestly. "I just didn't know what else to do." That, more than anything, stayed with him. Ethan reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. "I'm going to make a few calls," he said. "I won't leave. You'll be able to hear me." Mia nodded, watching him carefully as he stepped just a short distance away. She listened as he spoke quietly but firmly, heard words like prescription, coverage, emergency supply, and patient assistance. She didn't understand everything, but she understood enough to know that something was happening because of her question. When Ethan returned, he didn't sit right away. "Would you be willing to show me where you live?" he asked. Mia froze. "I didn't do anything wrong," she said quickly. "I know," he replied immediately. "This isn't about trouble. I just want to see your mom. To make sure she's okay." Mia thought hard about this. She had been warned about strangers. She had warned herself. But this man hadn't laughed at her. He hadn't ignored her. He hadn't told her to leave. "She won't like it," Mia said quietly. "That's okay," Ethan replied. "You can tell her it was my idea." Mia nodded slowly. "Okay," she said. "But she gets embarrassed." "I'll be careful," Ethan said. As they stood up, Mia adjusted her red backpack on her shoulders, gripping the straps again, grounding herself. She looked very small next to Ethan as they walked toward the exit, but her steps were steadier now. For the first time since she had entered the hospital, she was not walking alone. And Ethan knew, without yet fully understanding how, that this was no longer just about helping her mother get medicine. It was about a child who had been forced to grow up too quickly, and a moment that demanded not indifference, but responsibility. They stepped out of the hospital into the late afternoon air, which felt colder than it had earlier, or perhaps Mia was simply more aware of it now. She zipped her jacket all the way up and shifted the red backpack higher on her shoulders, the familiar weight of it steadying her. Ethan walked beside her without rushing, matching his pace to her short steps, making sure she never had to hurry to keep up. "Is it far?" he asked. Mia shook her head. "Not really," she said. "It just feels far when you're tired." They walked through streets that slowly lost their polish. The buildings became older, the sidewalks more cracked, the noise of traffic softer but heavier somehow. Mia knew these streets well. She avoided certain corners without thinking, crossed at places where the lights took longer, and glanced back once to make sure Ethan was still there. He was. "You come here often?" Ethan asked gently. "No," Mia replied. "Only when Mom gets worse." That simple answer told him more than any explanation could have. When they reached the building, Ethan immediately noticed how dark the entrance was. One of the hallway lights flickered weakly, casting uneven shadows on the walls. The smell inside was damp and stale, and the stairwell echoed with each step they took. "We live on the second floor," Mia said, already climbing. "The elevator hasn't worked in a long time." She stopped in front of a narrow door and hesitated, her hand hovering over the handle. "She might be asleep," Mia said quietly. "If she wakes up and sees me gone, she'll worry." Ethan nodded. "I'll let you talk first," he said. "I'm just here." Mia took a breath and opened the door. The apartment was dim, lit only by the gray light coming through a small window. The air was cold, and Ethan could immediately tell there was no electricity. A thin blanket lay on the couch, and beneath it was a woman whose face looked too pale even in the low light. "Mom," Mia whispered, moving quickly to her side. "I'm back." The woman stirred, her eyes opening slowly. "Mia," she murmured, her voice weak. "Where did you go?" "I just went out for a bit," Mia said quickly. "I brought help." The woman tried to sit up and failed, her breath catching. Ethan stepped forward instinctively. "Please don't worry," he said gently. "My name is Ethan. I met your daughter at the hospital." The woman's eyes widened with immediate panic. "I'm so sorry," she said, struggling to speak clearly. "She shouldn't have bothered anyone. I told her not to." "She didn't bother anyone," Ethan said calmly. "She was trying to take care of you." Tears filled the woman's eyes. "I didn't want this," she whispered. "I didn't want her asking. I didn't want her to feel responsible." Mia reached for her hand. "I was already responsible," she said softly. "I just didn't want you to be alone." Ethan felt his chest tighten at the quiet honesty between them. "My name is Anne," the woman said after a moment, her voice steadier now. "I'm sorry you had to see us like this." "There's nothing to be sorry for," Ethan replied. "But you need a doctor. Soon." And shook her head weakly. "We can't afford." "I know," Ethan said. "That's why I'm here." And looked at him, truly looked at him now, as if trying to understand why a stranger would stand in her dark living room and speak with such certainty. Mia watched them both, her heart racing, afraid that this was the moment when kindness would turn into refusal. "You don't have to," Mia said automatically. Ethan met her gaze. "I know," he said. "But I'm not leaving." Outside, a siren sounded in the distance, faint but growing closer. And squeezed Mia's hand. "You were brave," she whispered. "Even when I told you not to be." Mia shook her head, tears finally spilling over. "I was just scared," she said. Ethan stood there, in a cold apartment with a sick woman and a child who had carried too much for too long, and understood something clearly for the first time in years. Some moments do not ask whether you are ready. They simply ask whether you will stay. The ambulance arrived with a sound that made Mia's heart leap into her throat. The flashing lights spilled through the narrow street and painted the worn brick walls in restless colors. She stood pressed against Ethan's side, gripping the sleeve of his coat without realizing she had done so, her other hand still wrapped tightly around her mother's fingers until the paramedics gently asked her to let go. And was conscious but weak, her face drawn with exhaustion. She kept looking at Mia, her eyes filled with worry rather than fear for herself. "I'm here," Mia whispered again and again, walking alongside the stretcher as far as she was allowed. "I didn't go far. I came back." The doors of the ambulance closed, and the street suddenly felt empty. Mia stood still, staring at the place where her mother had been, as if remaining motionless might somehow bring her back faster. Ethan crouched down in front of her so she wouldn't have to look up. "She's in good hands," he said calmly. "They'll take her to the hospital and help her." Mia nodded, but her eyes were glossy and unfocused. "Is she in trouble?" she asked quietly. "Because she didn't have money?" "No," Ethan replied firmly. "She's sick. That's not something you get punished for." They followed the ambulance to the hospital in Ethan's car. Mia sat in the back seat, her red backpack on her lap, clutching it as if it contained something fragile and irreplaceable. She watched the streetlights blur past the window, her thoughts jumping between fear and guilt, wondering if she had done the right thing or if she had made everything worse. At the hospital, everything moved quickly. Nurses spoke in calm, efficient voices. Doctors asked questions Ethan answered without hesitation. Forms were signed. Decisions were made. Mia sat in a hard plastic chair in the waiting area, her feet dangling just above the floor, listening to every word, afraid to miss something important. After a while, Ethan came and sat beside her. "They're running tests," he said. "It will take some time." Mia nodded. "Can I see her?" she asked. "Not yet," he replied. "But soon." She leaned back against the chair and finally allowed herself to breathe, though her body remained tense, ready to spring up at any moment. Minutes turned into hours. At some point, exhaustion overcame her, and her head tilted sideways until it rested against Ethan's arm. He stayed perfectly still, aware of how much trust that small gesture held. He did not move until a nurse approached and spoke his name softly. When Ethan stood, Mia woke immediately. "Is she okay?" she asked, her voice thick with sleep and fear. "She's stable," he said. "She's getting the care she needs." Relief washed over Mia's face so suddenly that her eyes filled with tears she did not bother to hide this time. She wiped her cheeks with the sleeve of her dress, embarrassed but unable to stop. Ethan led her down the hallway to Anne's room. Mia stepped in quietly, approaching the bed as if afraid of breaking something fragile. Anne looked tired but more peaceful, monitors humming softly beside her. "Mia," Anne whispered. "You shouldn't be here alone." "I'm not," Mia replied, glancing back at Ethan. He stayed. Anne looked at Ethan with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. "Thank you," she said hoarsely. "I didn't know what else to do." "You don't have to know everything," Ethan replied. You just have to let people help. Mia climbed onto the edge of the bed carefully and took her mother's hand. I asked, she said softly. Just like I said I would. And squeezed her fingers weakly. Ethan stepped back, giving them space, but he didn't leave. Watching them together, he understood that this night was not an ending. It was the moment everything began to change. Morning came quietly, without the sharp panic Mia had learned to expect when something went wrong. She woke up in a small hospital family room, wrapped in a thin blanket that smelled faintly of detergent and something clean she couldn't name. For a moment she didn't remember where she was, and then the memory returned all at once, bringing with it the familiar knot in her stomach. She sat up quickly. Ethan was there immediately, sitting in the chair near the window, his jacket folded over the back, his phone face down on his knee. He must have been awake already, because he looked at her before she even spoke. Your mom is still resting, he said softly. Nothing bad happened. Mia let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding and nodded, pressing her hands into the blanket to steady herself. I didn't hear anything, she said. No yelling. No running. That's a good sign, Ethan replied. They went to see Anne together a little later. She looked weaker than usual but calmer, her breathing more even, her color slightly better. Mia stood close to the bed, afraid to sit, afraid that getting too comfortable might somehow be wrong. You stayed, Anne said quietly to Ethan. Yes, he replied. And I'm not planning to leave. Anne closed her eyes for a moment, as if the words were heavier than they seemed. A doctor came in shortly after, speaking carefully but honestly. The illness had been made worse by stress, by lack of proper medication, by cold and exhaustion. It wasn't something that could be fixed in a single day, but it was something that could be treated, if support didn't disappear once the crisis passed. Mia listened closely, even when the words were complicated. She understood enough to know that this wasn't over, but it also wasn't hopeless. Later that afternoon, Ethan sat with Mia in the cafeteria while Anne slept. Mia picked at a sandwich without much appetite, her eyes wandering around the room. Are they going to be mad at Mom? She asked suddenly. No, Ethan said. They're concerned. That's different. Concerned people don't usually sound nice, Mia said. Ethan gave a small, sad smile. Sometimes people forget how to sound kind when they're tired, he said. That doesn't mean they don't care. Mia thought about that for a long moment. Are they going to make me go somewhere else? She asked quietly. Like, away from her? Ethan didn't answer immediately, and Mia noticed. Her shoulders tensed, her fingers curling into the fabric of her dress. There are conversations, he said carefully. But nothing is decided without making sure you're safe and with someone you trust. She looked at him. Do you count? She asked. Yes, Ethan said without hesitation. I do. That answer seemed to settle something inside her. She took another bite of her sandwich, slower now, as if she had decided she was allowed to stay. Over the next days, routines formed. Ethan made calls, spoke to social workers, arranged follow-ups and prescriptions, and ensured nothing was left vague or temporary. Mia stayed close, sometimes drawing, sometimes sitting quietly, always listening. She noticed that Ethan never spoke over her, never dismissed her questions, never told her she was too young to understand. One evening, as they walked back down the hallway after visiting Anne, Mia stopped. Why are you doing all this? She asked. You don't even know us. Ethan looked down at her. I know enough, he said. I know you came to a hospital alone because you were trying to protect your mother. I know you weren't asking for comfort, only for information. And I know that when a child has to be that brave, the adults around her have already failed once. Mia stared at the floor, absorbing that. I didn't feel brave, she said. I know, Ethan replied. That's how bravery usually feels. That night, as Mia fell asleep, she didn't rehearse what she would say if someone told her to leave. She didn't plan an escape or imagine worst-case endings. For the first time in a long while, her thoughts drifted towards something unfamiliar. What it might feel like to be taken care of, instead of doing all the caring herself. The shift came quietly, almost politely, which made it harder for Mia to trust it. Things that had felt solid for several days began to feel uncertain again, not because anyone was cruel, but because adults started having conversations that did not include her. Ethan's phone rang more often. He stepped out of rooms to answer it. His voice stayed calm, but it lowered in a way Mia recognized immediately. She had learned that tone early in life. They were sitting in the small waiting area outside Anne's room when Mia finally spoke. Something is changing, she said, not looking at him. Ethan didn't pretend he hadn't heard. There are discussions, he said carefully. About what happens next. Mia nodded slowly, her feet swinging just above the floor. That usually means I don't get to choose, she said. Ethan turned toward her fully. This time, it means we're making sure you don't get forgotten, he said. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached into her red backpack and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was creased and soft from being handled too much. I wrote this, she said quietly, unfolding it. In case they ask me questions. Ethan took the paper carefully. It wasn't long. Just a few uneven sentences written in careful letters. It said her name, her age, her mother's name, and that she wanted to stay with her. At the bottom, she had written, I will be good. I will not be trouble. Ethan felt his throat tighten. You shouldn't have to promise that, he said. Mia shrugged. It helps sometimes, she replied. People listen more. Later that day, a social worker came to speak with them. She was kind, genuinely so, and she addressed Mia directly, which surprised her. They talked about school, about how long Mia had been taking care of herself and her mother, about what she remembered from before things became difficult. Mia answered honestly, without drama, without trying to make anything sound better or worse than it was. When the woman left, Mia sat very still. Did I say the wrong thing? She asked. No, Ethan said. You told the truth. That doesn't always help, Mia replied. No, he agreed. But it should. That evening, Anne was awake long enough to speak clearly. Mia sat beside her bed, holding her hand, while Ethan stood near the window. They asked me questions too, Anne said softly. About money. About help. About whether I can manage. Mia's fingers tightened. And, she asked. And looked at her carefully. I told them I'm not strong right now, she said. But I'm trying. And I told them I don't want to lose you while I do. Mia leaned forward and pressed her forehead gently against her mother's arm, her eyes squeezed shut. I don't want to go anywhere, she whispered. You won't, Anne said firmly. Not without me. Later, in the hallway, Mia stopped walking and turned to Ethan. If they say I can't stay, she said, choosing her words carefully, will you still talk to me? Ethan crouched in front of her without hesitation. Yes, he said. I won't disappear. Even if it's complicated, she asked. Especially then, he replied. The decision came the next morning, not as a dramatic announcement, but as a series of clear steps. And would stay in treatment longer, with proper medication and follow-up care. Mia would not be separated from her. Temporary support would be put in place, and Ethan would remain involved, officially, not just as a bystander who happened to be there once. When Ethan explained it to Mia, she listened carefully, her expression serious. "So I don't have to pack?" she asked. "No," he said. "Not now." She nodded, then asked one more question. "And you're not doing this because you feel bad?" Ethan shook his head. "I'm doing it because you asked for help the right way," he said. "And because someone should have answered you sooner." Mia exhaled slowly, the kind of breath that comes after holding too much in for too long. That night, she slept deeply, without waking at every sound. And for the first time since she had walked into the hospital alone, she allowed herself to believe that being heard did not have to be temporary. The weeks that followed unfolded slowly, but unlike before, the slowness no longer felt dangerous. It felt deliberate, like something being built carefully instead of something falling apart. Mia stopped counting hours and started noticing days. She noticed the way the hospital room grew brighter in the mornings, the way her mother's voice sounded stronger each time she spoke, and the way Ethan always arrived when he said he would. Anne's recovery did not happen all at once. There were tired days, difficult conversations, and moments when progress seemed to stall. But the medication worked. The follow-up care continued. The lights in their lives did not suddenly turn off again. When Anne was finally discharged, it was not back to the dark apartment. Ethan had arranged a small, clean place nearby, warm and quiet, with working electricity and a kitchen that smelled new. Mia stood in the doorway the first night, her red backpack still on her shoulders, unsure whether she was allowed to relax. "You can put it down," Anne said gently. Mia hesitated, then slowly slid the backpack off and set it by the door. The sound it made when it touched the floor was soft, but it felt loud to her, like a decision. Life began to take on a shape that did not revolve around emergencies. Mia returned to school. She brought notebooks instead of lists of things they needed. She raised her hand in class without her heart racing. At home, she watched her mother cook again, slow but smiling, humming quietly under her breath just like she used to. Ethan remained part of their lives, not as a savior, but as someone who had chosen to stay. He helped Anne find stable work when she was ready. He made sure no letters went unanswered, no deadlines were missed. But more importantly, he listened. Always. One evening, months later, Mia and Ethan sat on a bench outside the hospital. The building no longer felt frightening to her. It felt like a place that had changed things. "Do you remember when I asked if I could at least ask?" Mia said suddenly. Ethan nodded. "I thought that was the hardest part," she continued. "Asking. But it wasn't." "What was?" he asked. "Believing someone would care," she said. Ethan looked at her, at the way she sat now without shrinking, without gripping her backpack straps, without scanning faces for danger. "You made them care," he said. Mia shook her head. "No," she replied. "You listened." She swung her legs gently, looking up at the sky. "My mom says sometimes people think kindness has to be big," she added. "But sometimes it's just not walking away." Ethan smiled, feeling the truth of it settle in. As they stood to leave, Mia paused and looked back at the hospital doors. "I'm glad I asked," she said quietly. So was Ethan. Because one small girl with a red backpack had reminded him that change does not always start with power or money, but with a voice that refuses to stay silent, even when it is told it has no right to speak.
This story shows how indifference can hurt more deeply than poverty, and how simple attention can save someone when there seems to be no way out. Little Mia doesn't perform a heroic act in the usual sense. She simply finds the courage to ask a question, yet that moment becomes a turning point for everyone involved. One of the main lessons is that children often carry far more responsibility than they should because the adults around them are afraid or too exhausted to ask for help. The story reminds us that asking is not shameful. The real weakness lies in silence. For adults, this is a story about choice. Sometimes it is enough not to walk past, not to hide behind rules, and not to look away. One honest conversation, one person who chooses to listen can change a life forever. This is a fictional story written by me. I create original stories and use nature visuals intentionally to set a reflective and calm atmosphere. This story is not based on real people and is meant to explore emotions and life choices. Thank you for listening and spending this time with me.